I've made this title a little bit curious or provocative, how we became orbiting satellites, which I'm sure raises eyebrows. What on earth are you talking about? And I'm going to go briefly. What was that?
I was just thanking my wife for some scrambled egg.
Oh, I'll turn your microphone off, Dave.
Yeah, I will.
So in this, I'm going to go through a short history of how we've done astrometry from occultations. It's probably relevant to note that when we first started doing asteroid occultations back in the 70s, the main objective was to measure the size and shape of asteroids. And we set up large observing groups to observe them. Now, during that period of time, I had involvement with doing astrometry, mainly of comets. So I had familiarity with the astrometric reporting process and also astrometry on asteroids. So somewhere along the way in the early 2000s, I figured out, well, why don't we use our observations to generate, astrometry, because the precision should be fairly good. So I had some discussions with Gareth Williams from the Minor Planet Centre, early 2000s, about doing this. And we negotiated a special format. The process at that stage was to take that off. Was to have a reporting process which fitted in to the Minor Planet Centre's traditional reporting process as much as possible for ease of processing by them. And the process was to determine the time and location of closest approach of the shadow to the geocenter, and from that to derive an observed offset from the star. Started doing that in 2008, so that's 13 years ago. And we were allocated the IOU observatory number of 244. And we did that for many years. But about 10 years later, I did a significant revisions in occult and identified a number of issues with our approach for report or deriving the astrometry. Main one was the mathematics of the reductions. When I first started doing this, I think I'd got past the Commodore 64 and had a basic IBM computer, but that's back in the days of Windows 3 or something like that. So things were a bit clunky. And I put in place a number of simplifications of methodology. It was appropriate because of our computational power and my own computing abilities. And those approximations turned out having some significant weaknesses. There was also some issues about the reliability of referring our observations at the time or location of the conjunction closest approach of the shadow to the centre of the Earth rather than where we actually observed it. So back in about 2018, 2019, I did a major rewrite of the code for reducing the observations. And at the time, I thought I'd removed all the causes of inaccuracy, emphasis. I thought I'd removed everything. But as we know, when you think you've done everything right, there's always something new to find to prove yourself wrong. In all of that process, where there's a recognition that gravitational deflection of the starlight in the gravitational field was an issue, In an occultation, you have the star and asteroid appear to be aligned, but in fact, the amount of deflection of the starlight is different for the star and the asteroid, because the starlight goes further through the gravitational field than the asteroid light. So that if you imagine yourself on the Earth and you saw the star and the asteroid in perfect alignment and occultation, and then magically you entirely removed the existence of the sun, they would no longer be aligned. Now, interestingly, this issue of deflection, it affects our observations out to a solar elongation of about 130 degrees, 140 degrees. If you remember back to solar eclipses and Eddington and stuff, measuring the deflection of light around the sun, you probably think that deflection is something which only occurs close to the sun. Well, for our occultations, it's relevant when you're looking away from the sun, like in the opposite hemisphere to the sun. But back then, in 2018, we were still reporting the astrometry as an offset from the star as seen from the centre of the Earth. And then along came that asteroid called Phaethon, if that's how you pronounce it. In setting up the first observation effort for that, there were 4 different predictions for that event. All had differences from everyone else. No 2 agreed. After the event, we all went through it and everyone found deficiencies in their predictions. Nobody was actually, because this asteroid was relatively small, nobody had actually paid attention to their code, which had been developed in the previous decades, to having the requisite level of accuracy or precision for small asteroids. In this particular case, not everyone had allowed for deflection. And in this case, Phaethon is a 5-kilometre asteroid, from memory. The effective deflection was to displace the path by more than the path width. So if you'd put your observers exactly in the path as predicted without deflection, everyone would have had a miss. Everybody needed to be just to one side of the predicted path. And for these small asteroids, corrections for sight altitude was a significant correction. A guy by the name of John Irwin has developed code in his predictions to automatically include corrections for sight altitude. The occult path predictions have a factor in the right-hand column which will allow you to make a correction for the sight altitude. Well, we had problems with predicting. When we came to reductions, we had a similar issue. Everyone had disagreement and everyone had at least one issue. In occult, one of the issues I did for trying to simplify the calculations was, rather than compute precession, nutation, aberration separately for the star and the asteroid, I'd figured that because they're so close in the sky together, only a couple of seconds of arc apart as seen from the Earth, I could use a traditional assumption and calculate differential precession. And there's formula for doing that. But at the level of precision that we're dealing with, those approximations, which have been used for a century or so, at that level of precision, those approximations were inadequate. So even though the star and the asteroid are from the centre of the Earth, separated by only, say, 5 seconds of arc, the effects of precession and mutation and aberration over that distance was non-linear, which caused the problem. So revise the code to provide rigorous precession notation and aberration. In the process of doing that, spent a lot of time with the people at Horizons because they were keen to get the best accuracy from our orbits, from our observations, and worked through with them the issues of uncertainties to be associated with our astrometry. And our previous approach was grossly oversimplified. And we now include a combined uncertainties. People's event times, we combine those to get an overall uncertainty in event times. We have uncertainties from fitting an ellipse. We have complex arrangements for dealing with issues with the shapes of asteroids and the ability to report a centre of mass position rather than a centre of figure position, because centre of mass is what the gravity works on. And single chord events, a complex arrangement there to maximise the certainty of the astrometry for that. And at this level, uncertainties in the Gaia star position are a relevant input to the overall uncertainties. And we also have to allow for an error within Gaia EDR3. There was a similar error in DR2, which they largely, but not completely, overcame with EDR3. That there's, well, it's called a frame rotation error. It's sufficient to say that current Gaia does have a small error in its star positions. So at the end of Phaethon, we had agreement out of all this that this gravitational deflection, whilst it had to be dealt with in predictions, for reductions, the minor planet centre and Horizons wanted, in fact insisted, but they wanted any corrections for gravitational deflection to be handled by them. So we don't include any allowance for gravitational deflection in our astrometry. We also needed to, when computing the event time, our observers are on the surface of the Earth. We reduce all the observations on a plane which goes through the centre of the Earth. It's called a fundamental plane. And we have to allow for the time for the light to get from the observer down to this plane when deciding what the event time is. Now, that correction can be small. Maximum is about 0.02 seconds. But again, at the level of precision that we're dealing with, the light time going across the Earth's radius has become significant. But at that stage, our astrometry was still being reported as an offset from the star, as seen from the geocenter. Well, then along came Apophis. We had several successful events. The predictions turned out to be good. We were very worried to start off with that there were inconsistent results between the first and second event. And I think, as David Dunham has pointed out, we established that the star position for the first event, the Gaia star position was in error by more than 10 milliarc seconds. And that's where the former Gaia uncertainty was 0.1 of a milliarc second. So a big error in Gaia. But the Horizons people, David Farnokia, which David Dunham referred to, had residual concerns about our reduction process, in particular basis for how we derive the position of the asteroid as seen from the centre of the Earth, a geocentric position. And when we looked at that in detail, in the reduction process that I had implemented way back around about 2000, I had assumed that for an asteroid, the distance to the asteroid would have been well established because it was a numbered asteroid, well-determined orbit. You could rely upon the known orbit to establish the distance to the asteroid so that its parallax was known accurately, and you could convert an offset from of the shadow from the centre of the Earth to an angular separation by simple trigonometry of the distance to the asteroid and the distance from the centre of the Earth, an arc sine function or an arctan function will give you the angular separation. However, and Apophis highlighted this, we found that when you get into orbit solution software, one of the parameters, well, the orbit solution software varies all the parameters of an orbit in some manner or other, and it turns out to be quite possible, in fact, quite common at the level of precision we're dealing with, for the change in the position of the change in the distance to the asteroid having an effect on how we derived the apparent offset of the asteroid from the star as seen from the centre of the Earth. In other words, the orbit solution software had a feedback effect in changing our reported astrometry, which is not a totally unacceptable position, really. So, what is the issue? The individual observations, when we reduce the observation, we bring them all together on this plane through the centre of the Earth, this fundamental plane. And we move them around on that plane to bring them all together at a single common time. And from that, we can identify the centre of the shadow, the axis of the shadow, the location of that on that plane at a specified point in time. If you happen to be at that point, and that point is necessarily inside the Earth, not on the surface, but inside the Earth, as seen from that location on the plane, the asteroid and star are exactly coincident at that precise time. And that coincidence exists irrespective of any star reference frames, whether it's the apparent reference frame, whether it's the current J2000 reference frame, whatever. It is a pure observation. At this point in within the Earth, when I was sitting there, at this exact time, the star and the asteroid were perfectly aligned. But who's actually observing from 1,000 kilometres below you? So how did we move forward from this? Orbit determination software involves location of the observer. If you're on the Earth, you specify latitude, longitude, and site altitude, and that gets converted to a position in space, and the orbit software uses that. But we also have astrometry being reported from a number of satellites, such as the Hubble Space Telescope and various other ones. When those observations are reported, the observer location is specified as an XYZ coordinate in space, either with the origin at the centre of the Earth or at the centre of the Sun, actually the barycenter probably. And the orbit solution software is set up to handle such observations. So our solution to reporting our astrometry, avoiding all these hidden assumptions, it gets rid of the precession mutation, the aberration, deflection, light times, everything else, is to report the XYZ location of the center of the asteroid's shadow on that fundamental plane. This location is always inside the Earth, but the fact that the orbit, that location inside the Earth doesn't matter because the orbit solution software doesn't know where the surface of the Earth is. So we are, when we report the astrometry, we're effectively reporting the location of the observer within the Earth, where at the relevant time the asteroid has the identical position, and the orbit solution software treats this position exactly the same as if it had been measured from a spacecraft orbiting the Earth or Sun. So my provocative assertion is, in effect, our observation now being reported and analysed as if we were a satellite in orbit around, but inside the Earth. Now, just for completion, just so that you have some exposure to what the results are, I generated this report for the Minor Planet Center report for the 5 events involving Apophis, which we've had success with. This is what typically, well, this is what goes to the Minor Planet Center. Just going through it roughly, at the top left, there's some stuff there. MPC code 244 is our observatory code. Submitter is me, I'm generating the report. The measurers are the regional collectors. Then you see the observers. And you'll see that all the observers have a family name and an initial. That is the format which is required. It passes through to the ADS, Astronomical Data System. When you observe these things and the astrometry gets published by the Minor Planet Center, your name gets included in the ADS system. Now, below that is the astrometric positions going through the going through these columns. That's the asteroid number. Occasionally, provisional ID, won't go into that. Our station code 244, observing time, year, month, day, and UT, hour, minutes, and seconds to 0.01 of a second. The RA index of the star in degrees. CIS is stating the basis of the coordinates have been reported. That's the International Celestial Reference Frame in kilometres. The centre of this system here, the number 399, if you go into horizons, that number exists there for an observer location. That's the centre of the Earth. POS 1, POS 2, POS 3 are X, Y, and Z coordinates inside the Earth. They're all locations. The Earth's radius is about 6,000 and something kilometres. They're all inside the Earth. Here are the uncertainties in RA and DEC. That's a correlation between RA and DEC. Astrographic Catalogue, Gaia 3, COM, which is centre of mass. Quite a few observations, we're reporting the centre of mass of the asteroid, or for a binary system, the centre of mass of the system. And then we have some remarks. Now, a final thing, and David sort of touched on this, with Apophis, there are 3 observations there with good astrometry. This is 3 solutions from the Horizons people. Of those 3 observations, when they do the orbit solutions, they associate an uncertainty with each observation, and it's this uncertainty is the cause of why orbit solutions from different sources have different results. It's how you weight the observations. The first group of three, he applied an overall uncertainty of 10 milliarc seconds, and the residuals for each of the observations, they're all consistent, and 0.8, 0.7, 0.5, and a bit over 1 milliarc second, quite small. Then he reduced the uncertainty to 5 milliarc seconds, and particularly the declination, but they're all fairly consistent and quite small. And for the final one, he used our recommended uncertainties, 1, 5, and 3. And you can see the type of residuals we're getting there, which is quite small. Now, how significant is that? If you look at the Minor Planet Center and their overall residuals analysis for each of the observatory codes, you will find that for the traditional astrometry sites, their typical astrometric accuracy is no better than 100 milliarc seconds. It's typically around 200 or 300 milliarc seconds. High quality astrometry, where you're getting big telescopes, highly precise equipment and so forth, they're getting down to the order of 10 milliarc seconds. Probably think more like 20 or 30 milliarc seconds, but an order of magnitude better than traditional astrometry. We're getting down to half a milliarc second in a good event, which is more than a magnitude of precision greater. It's sort of 20 to 50 times greater than the best traditional astrometry. All of this makes our observations highly desirable. The people at Gaia that are extracting asteroid orbits from the Gaia observations are using our astrometry from occultations to validate the data they're extracting from Gaia. So I guess all I'm saying is that our astrometry has become very important, at least, if not more important these days than than size and shape of asteroids. And as will come apparent in a paper which will get published in the next few months, once the asteroid is smaller than about 10 kilometres, the astrometry that we get from even a single chord observation of such an occultation matches the precision available from Gaia. And if you get down to 5 kilometres or smaller, it is better than Gaia can achieve. And there's an awful lot of asteroids that small. And if you remember that slide in my earlier presentation, Europe has been very successful in observing occultations by small asteroids. Anyway, that's it. Time has got away from us. So I'll take questions. Is anyone there?
Yes,
Yeah.
there are still 48 participants, and we want to thank especially the 48 participants who, out of the 82 max or so that we had, who've stuck it out to the end despite the absence of supper. So, but thanks, Dave, Harold. That was really interesting, especially to think that our some of our observations are 30 to 100 times more accurate than any other method. It's really impressive what we're able to do. So I want to thank you for all that. Any questions for David at this time before we adjourn?
I
Okay,
think we're all stunned.
yeah. Well, let's
And
adjourn
you
at
should
this
be
time.
stunned.
I want to thank you all for coming and committing this time. It's an amazing series of presentations, if you ask me. And I just hope you'll all come back at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow, which is 20:00 Universal Time. We'll see you
6
then.
a.m. for us in Australia.
Yeah, bright and early. Okay. Thank you all very much.
You guys.
I'm leaving.